My name is Andreas Ruby. I'm an architecture critic. I have a firm for architectural communication, a publishing house for architectural books, and I live and work in Berlin, Germany. I was very excited when I received the invitation to come to this event in Tirana because I know the city. I have been here 4 years ago for a number of competitions that I had the honor to judge as a juror. I think for an architect, Albania must be a very specific territory, and also the city of Tirana. It's a place that, from a Western point of view, works like a chaos, but at the same time, it's a very beautiful chaos. So it's this beautiful and very specific symphony of urban sensations that provide almost like, a Gesamtkunstwerk. There's a lot of colors, a lot of movements, a lot of smells. So it's a very intense, sensorially intense environment. And you wonder how, as an architect, you can interfere in this condition, because it's very clear that the quality of the urban life in Tirana, and maybe also beyond, in other cities in Albania, is the product not of planning. It is the product of a performance. So if I place myself in the position of an architect and ask myself, how is it to work with this kind of unpredictable condition that is not so much traced by planning regulations and planning strategies, I think it must be at the same time very difficult, but also very inspiring. It's difficult because you never know what comes next. You always have to react. And it's beautiful at the same time because it leaves you room to improvise. I think the specific situation of Albania right now is that it's partly Europe and partly not Europe. Geographically and culturally speaking, the country is on the fringe of Europe. When you go there, you feel this is still Europe, somehow, culturally speaking, but also to some extent not. It's a very interesting condition of inclusion and exclusion at the same time. But politically speaking and economically speaking, it is not really part of this European kind of network. And it's a big question whether this is a problem or a quality. Most countries that you could compare with Albania, like in the European context, all strive to be included in the European Union as quickly as possible. And actually we have seen that this is not only an advantage. It has advantages because it makes you part of this network, but in terms of currency and financial crises that we've seen, these often also came at a high price for these countries. So there is the other line of argument where you could say the fact that Albania is not part of the European Union yet is maybe has also qualities. It allows the countries, for instance, to develop standards and regulations on its own terms, as opposed to having to take over the entire developed set of regulations and values that are defined by the EU, which to some degree are also exacerbated and excessive. Albania needs to implement development scenarios. It needs to invest in industries such as tourism, for instance. When I go, for instance, now to Durrës and see the kind of coastal development that has taken place there in the last 10 years, I can already see that there's some models that have been applied which are not like the most intelligent ones. So I would wish for the future development, maybe of the Albanian South, like this very beautiful part of the country, that the responsible figures in politics and economy trust in the ability of the country to develop its own models that are appropriate for its own development, rather than simply taking over and buying into established models that have been developed somewhere else. So the challenge, I think, would be to not get nervous by the development pressure, because obviously people say Albania needs to develop, it can develop, and there's a lot of interest from foreign capital to invest into the country. Yes, that's very nice, but the country should do this not by selling out to those people with money. It should always leverage the money that comes in from outside with the assets that it has to provide itself, with the qualities that it can contribute. And it shouldn't sell out those qualities to ready-made concepts from somebody who thinks he knows exactly how things work. That, I think, would be a very big mistake. If you really want to change these things, you need to develop a planning process where all urban development is seen in conjunction with each other on the scale of the country. So it should not be in this way that if you want to build something in this little village, you just have to ask the mayor whether you can do it. No, actually there should be like a sovereign planning policy department that always checks the entire building activity in the entire country. So the most important thing, I think, for a country like Albania that is in a situation of imminent growth, where it actually has the quality to attract capital, is to become aware of its own values, to understand that it has something to offer, so that it never acts under a kind of cultural minority complex. The country really sort of was propelled from this one extreme condition of a totalitarian ideological system into this kind of market economy with a very short transition time. It was a very brutal move. Like, you know, there's ways of how you can learn to swim, and I think this was the way where somebody throws you in the water and says you swim. Maybe now more than ever before in the history of Albania, there has come a moment where architecture and urbanism can, for the first time, work together with directions and strategies coming from government that will both give architecture and urbanism a very meaningful trajectory of influence, and on the other side show the powers of architecture and urbanism for a politics of national renaissance, new Albania. So I'm fairly positive that these two entities, the discipline of architecture and urbanism on the one hand, and the entity of political power as executed by the state and municipal levels of power, will actually yield a very productive relationship.